So during the Depression, now we're into the 30s, ITEL and McCulloch got together and formed IMAC. We're familiar with that, to build high power, high frequency tubes. They wanted to push the edge on that area. And they got financing. They managed to pick up $5,000 from a couple of people, and for that they gave them half the company. Kind of the first venture capital, kind of like Menlo Park right now on Sand Hill Road. So they cooperated. Litton, as I say, helped set up the vacuum tube shop. He also gave castings and his engineering drawings to the other companies, and they freely exchanged technical and commercial information so they could make these in high volume and good quality. Kind of like Jobs and Wozniak and the Homebrew Computer Club, getting together and exchanging things, or the hackathons or open source software that we see today. Well, during the Depression, 1936, Fred Terman sold part of a lot of intellectual property off to Sperry, a gyroscope in New York, and as part of that, they sent $1,000 back to his department for him to spend. And he says, well, there's this graduate I've got on the East Coast, David Packard. I'd like him to come back and do graduate work. So he offered David $500 plus $500 to spend on equipment if he came back and worked on his master's. So he did and met Hewlett, and the rest is history, as they say. That was sort of a start of university-industry cooperation, which is important here. It wasn't so important on the East Coast. Well, there were growing threats to peace. There was something called radio detection and ranging, radar, which we'll get into later. And they needed high volume transmitting tubes, and only IMAX really worked that well at those frequencies. So they were a hot commodity in those days. RCA started making them under license to the government, which took over the patent. And IMAX tubes were much better. But after the war, RCA focused on TV and broadcast, right? NBC, we know the Peacock. But the FCC was supposed to put the FM radio frequency around 50 megahertz, but they put it around 100 megahertz, which is where it sits today. And RCA's tubes worked very poorly as transmitters and also as receivers at VHF. So they did the right thing. They copied IMAX tube, okay, because that did work. But in 1947, IMAX sued RCA and GE and shut them down for infringement. And they transformed RCA into a marketing arm of IMAC. So RCA was selling the tubes, but they were the IMAC tubes. So the big dog was now Silicon Valley. This is kind of how it happened. That's a snapshot of why we ended up with the technology here on the peninsula and how it developed.